Janet, and you're now looking at a slide of Taz either starting or finishing a race. That is the start mark X of our race. I recognize it. And it's got some, looks like some loose lines in the water, but otherwise looking good.
Yeah, I just want to say this is one of Christine's pictures from 2018. So, and I believe Taz is bringing it home.
So I want to introduce everyone to who doesn't already know, Nathan DeVries, our Rear Commodore, who's also here doing the skipper's meeting with me. Nathan is, as Rear Commodore, in charge of everything on the water, and he has put together these sailing instructions.
Welcome. And in this photo, this is the start line, so you'll see these friendly faces on the dock when you're checking in for the race.
That's right. I think that's me and Scott and Esther. Between us, and you can't see it because it's lying face down on the dock, but what will be there when the race starts is a big orange square, and that is the one side of the start line, and the other side is that orange buoy you saw floating in the middle of the estuary that Taz was sailing by. Okay, so now let's go to the next one. I just wanted to show you what the currents are going to be like on April 24th. So it's going to be an ebb, but it's going to be slacking. So the maximum ebb is right at the start, which will help you, assuming we have an upwind start, it's going to help you get all the way up to Jack London Square if you need to. So that's nice. So one of the things you want to do before, maybe not so important for you know, a beer can race, but still a great thing to practice, is to look at the tides and the weather and the currents. So I thought I'd put that little slide in there, which I found for Saturday, which hopefully is accurate. Okay, so next slide. This slide is to show you that the way that that the race committee will communicate with the racers, there's three ways to communicate. There's flags, and there's sounds, and there's radio. So hopefully by now, anybody who's racing has already downloaded the Sadie Hawkins Sailing Instructions. I think that's probably backwards, but anyway.
No, fine. Good.
Oh, okay. And you can get them on JibeSet. Just go to JibeSet and look for Island Yacht Club's race. If you didn't actually register your boat, you can still, and someone else did it for you, you can still see it up there, and you can get the sailing instructions and download them. And it's really essential that you have the sailing instructions on board the boat, because if you go to the next slide, it has the courses and the marks.
Oops, sorry.
So the courses, this is the map of the estuary with the courses, and you can see that we have, let's see, we have course, you can see the RC, that's the race committee, and the start is in between the race committee and X, and depending on which course you're going to be going either upwind through that or downwind back through it. So I wanted to, where are my notes here? I wanted to point out that you have to have the sailing instructions printed out. You're going to want to get there early. You want to have a view of the start line. You want to make sure that you delegate boats and delegate jobs on the boat. One person should have the sailing instructions so that they can be on the lookout for flags and signals from the race committee, including monitoring channel 72. So hopefully you have your sailing instructions that you with you there. Did anybody, I wonder if anybody's downloaded them. VHF channel 72, Ross is putting in the chat. Exactly.
And by the way, to people who have registered already, like prior to Friday, I already sent out a nice little skipper's gift and also the course sheet. So that should be there, but the full SIs are available on JibeSet.
So just going back one slide now to the slide with the flags. One thing that I have found really handy is, and if you already know all of this, then it's going to be short. It'll be over soon. But if you are not familiar with the flags, it's really handy to have a printed copy or even like a little, a printed copy in hand so that you can see the course flags and you can see the division flags. So if you know that you're in Bravo division, you're in Division B, and you're going to have the second start, you're going to wait for you can see here on the slide there, it says warning, prep, and start. So at the 5-minute mark before your race starts, there's a warning, and it could be a gun. I don't think we're using guns, so it might just be a horn. We might not have a sound at all. Sounds are a courtesy. It might be on the radio, but there's definitely going to be a flag. So what you want to do is you want to have somebody watching at your 5-minute warning, because that's when your course flag and your division flag will go up. And you have to see what the course is so that you can look at the next slide, Ross, so you can look and see which, actually it's 2 slides more, one more.
One more, there we go.
There we go. So you can see, where are we don't have the courses. We don't have a slide for the actual courses.
Oh,
but
that's in the insides, yes.
But that's in the sailing instructions. So let's say, for example, course 1, I have my sailing instructions here. So course 1 is XS, here, I'll hold this up, you can see on my screen. XS to, what does it say? 1P. So that means, just so you know, XS means you're going to leave X to starboard. So you're going to pass the starboard side of your boat past the start buoy. And then 1P means you're going to leave 1 to port. And you can see 1 is all the way up by Jack London Square. So you might have, if you have course 1, you have a long course. And really the race committee's responsibility and the PRO on deck is to pick a course that meets the weather conditions. So if there's really light air, you're not just going to be floating around indefinitely trying to get to Jack London Square and back. So bring the sailing instructions so you can see which course you're going to be sailing on, and make sure you check and see that it's your division flag that went up at the same time as the course. The reason I'm saying this is because by the time your start comes, 1 minute before your start, your course flag goes down and your division flag, your course flag goes down, so you don't have a clue as to what course you have anymore, unless the race committee announces it on the radio, which sometimes they do. Although technically they're not supposed to. So here's a view, let's go next slide. This is a view of the starting and finish. And one thing to keep in mind is what we have obstructions. There's some obstruction areas, and one of them is going through the start finish unless you're starting or finishing. So that's important to think about when you're on your long downwind leg. You don't want to be going through the start line, because then you're disqualified. You can't undo that. So let's go to the next slide. And we have there's Mark 1, which is all the way up by Scott's Seafood and Jack London Square. That's what it looks like. And so if you're quite some distance away from it, you can't see it hardly at all. So someone with really sharp eyes will be looking for the marks. All right, next slide. There's a slide that shows Mark 5. Oh wait, no, sorry, we're at this one. This is showing you 2, 3, and 4. And 4 is the day mark. It's the only one that isn't a little orange buoy. It's a big, tall wooden thing with a green triangle on it. And it sticks way up out of the water, and you can see it from anywhere at the west end of Coast Guard Island. We're not going to be most likely sending you on a course behind Coast Guard Island where there's a lot of obstructed areas, but do look at that on your sailing instructions on the course sheet, and make sure you avoid the areas that are restricted, now called obstructions, because there's sunken vessels there and other debris, and you could get tangled up in it, and plus you'd get disqualified, which both of those are bad. Okay, next slide. That's what Mark 5 looks like off in the distance. Can you see it? Probably not, but you know it's down there. So just so you know, it's way past the Coast Guard ships. Okay, let's see, next one. Oh, here's another view of Mark 5. There you go. And this next slide shows you Mark 4 again. That's the one at the end of Coast Guard Island, and where it says obstruction, where the word obstruction is, there's actually 3 red day marks, and you can't go inside, in other words, to the right of those, below it, close to Coast Guard Island, because that's where there are things that have been sunk in there that will tangle you up, and you don't want to go there. Okay. Friday, I noticed on Jibe Set, Friday is when you should all be checking Jibe Set to find out what division you've been assigned to, so we can do it at the last minute, mostly because of pandemic planning. And I think that Nathan might have a couple of words to say about the divisions he's thinking of having, instead of just the double-handed and family gathering groups. Nathan?
Yeah, with the changes to the COVID tier of Alameda, we're now in the orange tier. So that's opened up a lot more crude racing, and we're seeing quite a few crude registrations. So over the coming days, I'm going to kind of evaluate the fleets to try and get good groupings of similar boats. So keep an eye on Jibe Set, and I'll send an email out to all races when I post the fleets too. So you'll know to jump on Jibe Set and check it out. And as Janet was saying, that'll tell you which start you'll be in. So look out for that at the start time too.
Most likely, I see some questions here that the sequence will be announced over the radio as well. I haven't been able to talk to our PRO in the last couple of days to make sure about that, but usually he does announce them over the radio, or have someone there on race committee announcing them off over the radio. And I do also see a note from Christine Weaver, who took the picture of Taz finishing. So it's a little bit more excusable to have a line hanging off the side of the boat if you're finishing a race, I suppose. So that's good. Okay, are there any other questions?
Actually, can I just ask one that's been coming up in recent races? So we've had a race recently, as in the last like 2 months, where instead of being like course 1 to 6, it was the ones where you actually start heading towards the bridges, like this one back here, Park Street. That happens when the wind direction changes, not necessarily uncommon during the springtime. So if your first mark is Mark 5, and then you're coming back up and then you're heading towards Jack London Square, are you allowed to cross the start line?
Not unless it's not unless it's a mark in the race.
All right, so you just have to always pass with the start line or the buoy to portside.
Well, if you're
so there's a specific rule in the sailing instructions that says that the start line's an obstruction unless you're preparing to race or starting to race or finishing the race. Any other time, you're not allowed to pass through the start line. And the reason for that is if you start the race and you do a short leg and then you cut through the start line, you may be cutting through the start line when other people are trying to finish the race. So I think the rule is there just to avoid being in the start zone when you're not starting or finishing. So just keep that in mind. And as Janet said, that's usually on downwind legs where you'll actually go past X mark. You just want to make sure that you don't cross the start line if you're not finishing.
Great.
I do see a comment from, I have a question from someone saying, what location are the currents in the slide? So that I Googled estuary, Oakland estuary currents, and that's where that's from. It's right there in the estuary. I was amazed, but that's what I found. And then I see Nancy says that Tom is thinking there'll be only one division. So see, we have to have some meeting of the minds with our racing officer on deck and our rear commodore, but by Friday, we'll have that all ironed out and the division or divisions will be posted. I see another comment. Someone says that last week, Bravo and Charlie were combined and you didn't know. And so if Bravo and Charlie both start at the same time, or if two divisions start at the same time because maybe there's only 3 boats total in that particular division, or then both flags go up. So both of them start. And it should be on the radio, Bravo and Charlie, this is your start. Okay, any other, I don't see anything else. Here's a question to cover the start line as an obstruction. When should that be asked? What's the question about the start
Steve,
line as an
Steve,
obstruction?
you can unmute and ask your question if you like.
Okay, I want to do it, I want to cover it because having the start line as an obstruction is something that people probably need to understand how that is treated, especially if you got two boats approaching from like the windward leeward situation, and if one boat's trying to keep the other guy high and the starting line's coming up.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. We actually had a recent racing rules meeting through Encinal Yacht Club where I asked this exact question: can you use an obstruction tactically? Which I think is what your question is. And the answer was yes, you can. So if you know there's an obstruction coming up, you can force someone to be in a zone where they'll need to make a move to get out of that obstruction.
Well, the way I'm thinking of it more is if you're coming up on the obstruction, the boat that doesn't have right of way can call for water at the obstruction and force the other boat to tack off.
Well, if they have the right of way and the other boat is going to be forced into the obstruction, I would think that the thing to do would be to give them room to be able to avoid the obstruction.
That's the correct answer, and I just wanted to make sure people are wrapping their head around that.
Yeah, so if you're approaching an obstruction,
yes, I got it right.
You should very loudly ask the other boat for room to tack, and they can either say you tack or tacking. So that's within your right to do when you're in an obstruction area.
So the reason that most of these rules, and I've been looking at them for a while, but most of these rules are exist for safety. So you don't want people crossing the start at the same time as people who are trying to start. You don't want people sailing in obstructed areas because there are things submerged in the water and we know about it. And you have to give people room so that they don't end up crashing into having the option of they have to either lose the race, give up all this space, give up their tack, or crash into the shore or an obstruction. It's all safety related.
Right, I understand that, but the starting line one is always entertaining on the second lap because at that point you're not starting any boats. And at that point, if you actually have your boat on boat racing at that point and you got obstruction, you never know what the scenario is. And I think it's a good discussion to have with this group to understand that, yes, you treat this particular situation as an obstruction. So
Agree.
Right, and in their sailing instructions, it's listed under obstruction.
Right, I understand. I'm just trying to get the people, I'm just raising the point that it's an obstruction and you really need to treat it as an obstruction.
I really appreciate that you raised that. That's great. Thank you very much.
No worries.
Very good point.
Well, it's one that's it's been tricky in the past, so.
While we're on the topic of obstructions, Janet, were you going to talk about the starting line at all?
The starting line as an obstruction?
So one thing to keep in mind is that the sailing instructions tell you about obstructions to be aware of, but there are other obstructions on the course. So one thing you'll note is when you're crossing the start line, the dock is an obstruction. So when you're approaching the start and figuring out where you want to be crossing the start line, just keep in mind that depending on which tack you're on, you may be heading for the dock. So you'll need to be thinking a few steps ahead, whether you'll need room to tack as you're approaching or crossing the start line.